Good morning, friends. Welcome to another story for all ages from my home. Our story today is inspired by our month's theme. This month is May, and we began last week with our theme of thresholds. For anyone who might not know what a threshold is, it can be a door or a gateway or a bridge that transitions us from one place or one form to the next. So the story I picked today may not have pictures, but I still think the words illustrate this idea very well. So I hope you'll listen along with me today. Our story today is called Old Joe and the Carpenter, and it is written by Pleasant L. DeSpain. Old Joe lived way out in the countryside, and he had one good neighbor. They'd been friends all their lives, and now that their spouses were buried and their children were raised, all they had were their farms and each other. For the first time, they did have an argument, though. It was over a stray calf that neither of them really needed. It seemed as though the calf was found on Joe's neighbor's land, so he claimed it as his own. But old Joe said, "No, that calf has the same markings as my favorite calf. It must be my own." Well, they were both a bit stubborn, so they just stopped talking to each other. It seemed that a dark cloud had settled over Joe, until there came a knock on his door one week. He wasn't expecting anybody that morning, and as he opened the door, he saw a young woman who had a box of tools on her shoulder. She had a very kind voice and deep, dark eyes, and she said, "I'm a carpenter, and I'm looking for a bit of work. Maybe you'd have some small jobs that I can help with." Old Joe brought her into the kitchen and sat her down, gave her some stew that he had on the back of the stove. There was also some home-cooked bread, fresh churned butter, and homemade jam. While they were eating and talking, Joe decided that he liked this young carpenter, and he said, "I do have a job for you. Look right out there through my kitchen window. See that farm over there? That's my neighbor's property. And you see that creek running right down our property lines? That creek, it wasn't there last week. My neighbor did that to spite me. He took his plow up there, he dug a big old furrow from the upper pond, and he flooded it. Well, I want you to do one better. Since he wants us divided that way, you go out there and you build me a big, tall fence, so I won't even have to see his place anymore." And the carpenter said, "Well, if you have some lumber and some nails, I've got my tools, and I'll be able to build you something that you like." Joe had to go to town to get some supplies, so he hitched up the wagon and showed the carpenter where everything was in the barn. The carpenter carried everything she needed down to the creek and started to work. The carpenter's work went smooth and fast. She did her measuring and her sawing and her nailing, and it was about sunset when old Joe returned. The carpenter had finished all her work. When old Joe pulled up in the wagon, his eyes opened wide and his mouth hung open. There wasn't a fence at all. It was a bridge, going from one side of the creek to the other. It had handrails and all. It was a fine piece of work, and his neighbor just started crossing the bridge with his hand stuck out and was saying, "Oh, Joe, you're quite a fellow to build this bridge. I'd have never been able to do that. I'm so glad we're going to be friends again." And Joe, he put his arms around his neighbor and said, "Oh, that calf is yours. I've known it all the time. I just want to be your friend, too." About that time, the carpenter started putting her tools in the box and then hoisted it onto her shoulder and started to walk away. And Joe said, "Wait! Hey, come back, young carpenter. I want you to stay on. I've got lots of projects for you." The carpenter just smiled and said, "Oh, thank you, Joe. I'd like to stay on, but you see, I can't. I've got to go build more bridges." So she walked on, and there ends our tale. I hope you liked this story today. I thought it was a great story about building peace in our communities. Even if we're not the ones having a grudge against each other, maybe we can influence others to mend their friendships and relationships. So I hope you go and be the change. I know we're all distancing from one another still, but there are still ways to show love and build peace. I also want to say Happy Mother's Day before I get off. I'm sure not everyone will be viewing this the day I post it, but I hope you enjoy your day. Take care.